Good afternoon, good day, everybody. Once again, my name is David Dart. I don't look quite as young as I do in the picture, missing the goatee and the beard. We're going to be discussing or reviewing the 7.15 long-term service release, cumulative update 1. You'll see a CU1 on the system. We're going to review some of the new features that are currently out with this product. The products are currently being released about once every quarter, with a new release coming out on regular schedules. So 7.15, the long-term service release LTSR came out in about August of last year. Then in November, 7.16 came out. Now 7.17 is out. So you can expect a new version every quarter. And one of the rationales behind the deployment of the long-term service release, or just LTSR, was so that people didn't have to keep updating. So if your company is adverse to being early adopters, you can do that long-term service release and get an extended contract where it will be supported for an extended period of time. And what I'm going to do today is give you an overview of some of the things that the courses that we offer will provide you with some insight into, and how to configure them and how to bring them in within the system. Now, without going into too much detail on a lot of the new features when you're looking at the 7X, we have a lot of additional what I call bells and whistles that enhance your ability as an administrator to deploy out the resources that we want to give to our users, i.e. applications, desktops, etc. So there are multiple new features within the 7X environment that allow you to install it easier. There's some PowerShell scripts that you can use to install without having to go through the GUI. There are some PowerShell scripts that will allow you to update your XenApp 6.5 to a 7.15 environment and on the system. So a lot of new installation options. The localhost cache, which came out a couple of issues ago, is actually now the default. So when we look at the localhost cache here in just a moment, you're going to see how this is the default on the system rather than an optional component. We've got the ability to configure multiple restarts within the system. So now that we within the environment, we can do multiple server restarts as necessary, where previously we only had the ability to do one restart for a delivery group. There's support for federated authentication services, support self-service password reset component, and I've got some of these set up already. A workspace environment management is now one of the newer components that will allow you to transition away from group policies to configure your VDA-enabled desktops. We've got the AppLayering, and then there are some cloud-based deployments that are slowly becoming more and more standard every day within the environment. So the first thing we're going to look at is the localhost cache. Initially, when the 7.7 came out, the Citrix released a new component called connection leasing, which would ensure that if you had an outage, you would still be able to bring in users to access their resources. The limitation on the connection leasing was it had to be users that had previously launched a application and or a desktop, and some desktops were not actually supported. So Citrix developed the localhost cache, which was an option for in lieu of connection leasing, but now it's actually the default. So the system is now going to default to the localhost cache, which is going to use a backup of the SQL Server database. It's more robust. It's relatively immune to corruption on the system, so it makes it a little bit more resilient for a high availability option in a smaller environment. Not meant to supplant a full SQL Server, but it does give you some options. So when you enable this, the system is going to use 2 additional services. It's going to use what's called the high availability service and then the synchronization service, and provide a secondary broker function within the environment. This will then synchronize the database onto the delivery controller every 2 minutes if there's been changes on your system. So it's the default now when you're looking at 7.15 and up. So when you're looking at an environment here and on the system, you're going to see, if you look at your broker site inside of PowerShell, you'll see some options for this particular component. And when we're looking at this, you'll see that the system, let me get my pointer here, you'll see that this guy is currently false for connection leasing. And then the localhost cache, you'll see down here at the bottom, is currently enabled. So if you're looking at the system, the localhost cache is enabled, set it true. And this is just set using the set the broker site command and turn it on or off within your environment. This then creates the synchronized snapshot of the original SQL Server database. Once again, this is not really meant to supplant the a fully resilient SQL Server deployment, but it is meant to ensure that you have high availability if necessary in a smaller environment where you may not have the wherewithal to actually deploy multiple SQL servers within the system. The multiple server restart option is something that you can do on your delivery controllers using what are called tags. So what I've done in my system is I have a delivery group here for server applications and desktops. So this would be a server deployed application or a desktop within the system. When we're looking at the delivery controller here, and this is something that we show you how to do in class, you take one of your servers, and prior to the current versions, when you wanted to set a restart schedule on your delivery group, you would edit the delivery group, you would set your restart schedule, and in this case, you only had the ability to apply this to the entire delivery group. So you could restart your systems daily, every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You would choose the day you wanted. Do you want to send a notification or not? Do you want to restart them all at the same time, or randomize them over a period of time? So we were limited in what we could do with the restarts. Well, now we can come in and we can create additional restart schedules using PowerShell. So you would come into the servers and you would choose your servers. And if I look at a server here and I manage the tags, you'll see that this particular server has a tag called group 2, and you can give it any tag moniker that you want, something that makes sense within your particular environment. So this one's got a tag. Great. I then went into PowerShell and I'm going to run it, and I ran a script. So I ran a script called the new broker reboot schedule v2. I gave the script a name. What's the group that it applies to? When do I want it to reboot? Everything you saw in the GUI. The frequency is going to be weekly. We'll do it at 2 a.m. The reboot duration is over 2 hours. But we restricted this one to group 2. So now the other server, server 1, would reboot according to what the GUI said. Server 2 would reboot according to what the this particular reboot schedule gives you the option to do. And we can do the same thing. We have a warning duration, you have a warning interval, you even have a message that you can put out. So you can use the PowerShell to do this within your environment. And once you run the script, it's going to show you that on this particular delivery group, we've got a reboot schedule done weekly. This is going to be a Saturday reboot on the system. And if this is going to be on group 2, we'll start at 2 a.m. on the system, and there's a warning duration. So it's going to tell you what you need to do for the reboot. So this is giving you some additional options when you're looking at the password reset option within the system here. So that's one option that we new feature that you have on the system. You can come in, you can configure within your delivery controllers. This one does have to be done in PowerShell, so you need to be a little bit comfortable using PowerShell within your environment here. And these tags can be used for multiple things. You don't have to use them just for that. You can do tags for configuring group policy settings, filters, etc. So this gives us some additional options on the system. Some of the other things that I mentioned when we were looking at this item here, they have the federated authentication service support. So this is a component that you can install on a server. And we've got the self-service passwords reset option. So for your environment. So what you can do on this, if we're doing the SSR PR, is on the on a server, you install on the server. Let me go ahead and connect this up. You install the. Let me get this guy to close out there. There we go. You install on the server the Citrix component for the self-service password reset. So you'll see an option here. This will require you to configure some folders. So you would configure some folders to store user identification as well as secret questions. So we can configure this for where we want the components to be synchronized and what questions do we want to ask the user. So when the user comes into the system, if they are locked out, how do we want to handle the connection? So I've got this configured, and if the user comes in and logs on to the storefront server, on the system, one of the first options you'll see, and we'll just go and log on here. You'll see this option down here that says account self-service. This will allow the user to come in and reset their password if they're locked out. So this will give the user the opportunity to forego having to do a help desk call, which is going to make your life a little bit easier. Once they've logged on within the system here, let's see. Get this password in here. Once they log on, the user will see an additional tab on their storefront that will say tasks. And this is where the system will ask them to configure their security questions. So the user would then come in and answer their security questions on the system so that so it will be stored in that share. So this gives us the option to configure this. And this is something you then integrate within your storefront server. So you can look at your authentication methods on your storefront server, and you can choose your account self-service, and you just say that you want to use the Citrix self-service password reset option. And then we just configure it with the system. So this is an additional option we have that's now available. Now, we've also got, when we're looking at Storefront here, since I'm here, I'll go ahead and mention this. We've also got the ability to delegate the user's credentials. In earlier versions of Storefront, when the Storefront was deployed, it was required that it be a member of a trusted domain. No longer. Now you can put your Storefront inside of inside of a work group and configure it to delegate the authentication task to specific delivery controllers. So you could choose to come in and configure and add in your delivery controllers in the system. And Storefront would then no longer be required to authenticate the user. Instead, it would forward this on to an XML broker. So this is an additional option you have when you're looking at deploying the Storefront servers on the system. So this gives us some additional functionality in the newer versions of Storefront. And this happens to be 2.12. We're currently on 2.14 on the system. So if you download 7.17, you'll get 2.14 for your Storefront deployments within the system. some of the other new options within Storefront, we have some additional configuration settings. So when you're looking at your receiver components, we can configure some Kerberos delegation. We can do our HDX routing. All of these were available previously, but in many cases, you had to go within the web config files and reconfigure the web config files. So now a lot of these are being configured directly within the GUI. So a lot of these settings. We can also change the receiver for websites. We can now come in and go directly into the GUI, and we can configure the appearance. So we can change the appearance of the Storefront server itself. And you can add in your company's logos. You can change the colors. So you have a whole host of additional options on your Storefront. So new items on the system, as well as, for instance, featured app groups within the environment. So you have some options. And so a lot of these settings previously had to be completed at the web config level. We couldn't do them inside of the GUI. So just some new features that you're going to see inside of the Storefront. Now, some of the newer features, heavy-duty features that we're looking at on the system are going to give us some additional functionality on your system. So when we're looking at the say some of the new guys here, and other than this, one of them that we have, the new features, is called Workspace Environment Management. This is what is taught inside of the in one of the advanced classes. And the Workspace Environment Management is a software solution that allows you to transition from utilizing group policies or Citrix policies to a software deployment that will do the same thing. This is going to help deliver optimal performance within your virtualized environment, especially when you're dealing with VDAs on a virtual machine. The benchmarks that have been shown to improve this have shown an 80% reduction in time for log on, primarily because many of the settings that would previously have been done inside of a group policy are now applied to the machine before the user ever logs on and when the machine boots up. So it'll be cached onto the local machine, regardless of who the user ultimately logs onto the system, and will already be there. So many things will automatically come in and already be done. And when you're looking at the Workspace Environment Management, there we can do a whole host of configuration settings, and we'll take a look at a live environment where this is actually deployed. So we can use this for CPU management, memory management, process management, some of your environmental settings, your Microsoft USB settings, Citrix UPM settings, fast log off on the system. So we have a whole host of settings that we need to, or we can, I should say, configure in lieu of doing a group policy. So if you're in a Citrix environment and you do not have the access to Active Directory that you may want to do a GPO, this may be a viable option for you within your system. And this just requires a few components. It's going to require you to have a server. This is going to be your broker server. This can be any Windows box you want on your system. So any Windows box, you can install the broker component onto the environment. The broker will be connected up to a SQL server, and you'll have a database that's going to contain all of your settings. This is very much like your data store for your XenApp XenDesktop deployment. Your endpoint devices, whether they're VDA or not, will have an agent host installed on it. You'll have an administration console that is stored somewhere. It can be installed on the broker or it can be installed on a client machine. You come onto your administration console and you do your settings. So on your administration console, you come in and you define your settings. These will be passed through the broker and stored in the SQL Server database. And then the settings will then be synchronized between the broker and the agent host at periodic time frames on the system. So this gives you the ability to improve and optimize the performance within your system. So when you're looking at the WIM, we actually have, you have a console here, and I'm gonna pop over to a live one, which is the newer version. This is an older version. So if we're looking at the broker machine, this is my broker machine here. And within my broker machine, I've already launched the Workspace environment management. And we have the option of using this, of literally replacing for your virtual desktops many settings that previously had to be done via GPO. We can add in specific applications. We can choose what we want them to see on the start menu. We can map printers for them. So things that we did in GPOs, now we can just do it right here. Network drives, virtual drives, we can configure specific registry entries that we might want. Some environmental variables on the system, what ports, INI files, etc. So we can configure the user's machine here for multiple things. We can define some filters, so we can define filters based on specific conditions and rules. We can assign these to specific components and users, and we have a modeling wizard just like all the others. We can optimize the system. So we can choose to optimize their system for multiple components. Their CPU management. So when they log on, do we want to do some spike protection on the CPU? And then we have the usage limit and the sample time and the idle priority time. The CPU priority, so we can add in specific processes to give it a higher priority or a lower priority, things you can do in Task Manager. CPU affinity, and we can do some CPU clamping options. We can define memory options. So are we going to use, we're going to enable the working set optimization for the environment and specify specific processes that would be excluded from this. I/O management, fast log off on the system. Fast log off is just going to log the user off and do remaining tasks behind the scenes. We can do the policies and profiles. So this is where we can start coming in and look at some policy options that are going to give you some additional components. So we have some environmental settings that we can set up. We can set up do we want to hide common programs, hide help, hide find, select a specific theme file, visual style, their wallpaper on the system, hide updates. What do we want on their desktop? Do we want to hide the computer icon? So you may be familiar that this is looking very, very similar to what you would do with group policy. So disable the recycle bin. What do you want to do with Windows Explorer? The control panel, what can they see or see in the control panel? So I could show only specified control panel applets, and I can add in the various applets that I want them to actually see on the system. The big one, though, is going to be the Citrix profile management settings. This is going to help improve, excuse me, the profile management. So rather than doing this via a GPO, we can configure the system to deploy this using WIM. So we can, and all the settings that we have inside of the policy settings we have here, and we can enable it. We can set up process group, excluded groups. What's the path to the user store? How do we want to handle profiles? Do we want to migrate existing profiles on the system? Do we want to stream profiles? So do we want to enable profile streaming? When do we want to synchronize it on the environment? What directories do we want to use? Do we want to do any registry synchronization? Do we want to do a backup of the NT? So we can do this. We can do a lot of the group policy settings right here. And there are also some VMware. If you're dealing with VMware environment, you can do some persona settings on the system for their desktop and files and folders. So this gives us an additional way of deploying out the resources inside of the system as necessary for the users. Another new component that you're going to see when you're looking at the latest and greatest versions here is going to be AppLayering. This is a new feature that Citrix has deployed to optimize the deployment of desktops. So with this particular option, we have the ability to separate out the various components that make up a desktop system. We can separate out from the desktop the operating system. So we would create a specific layer just for the operating system. If I need to then go update the OS in the system, we just come back and we update that particular layer. We would have a platform layer. The platform layer would be for specific deployment options, hypervisor tools, the VDA, domain joins, things that are specific to the platform. Then we would create what's called an application layer. And you can do one or more application layers on your system. So you could define an application layer for each app. So I could have one for my Microsoft Office components. I could have another one for my Adobe products, another one for my Semantic products, and so on and so on. I create an app layer. Then when I need to, I can mix and match these guys on the system. So we can mix and match the applications with different operating systems, and I can reuse them. So I could create, say, one OS layer for, say, Windows 2016, and then have two platform layers, one for Xen Server and another one for, say, ESX. Then I could do my application layers, and then I could create what's called a template utilizing these various layers, and then copy that template out using MCS to clone out to multiple machines, or PVS, and this integrates with both machine creation services and with provisioning services. So this has some additional options as well, or components that need to be done within the system. So there are some additional components you'll need. One of them is an enterprise layer manager. This is a downloadable image. You download it from Citrix. It's going to create some repositories. It'll start with a 300 gig repository that you can increase if necessary. And this is where your layers are going to be stored within the system. Then you create your various layers, and you create a template, and that allows that template to then be used to create your persistent, your non-persistent desktops. Now, one additional layer that is taking more relevance as we move forward is what are called elastic layers. Elastic layers are similar to an application layer, with the exception that it is not included into the original operating system image. So when you're looking at, say, a hypervisor, if you're looking at, say, a server machine here, the server machine will still have the same storage. And this storage would have been brought in from a template that consisted of the OS layer, the platform layer, and an application layer. But when you have specific applications that you only want certain users to have, we can create an application layer. And that application layer would be integrated into the system at first logon. So this would be integrated within the user's desktop at first logon, and then subsequent ones would use the same one. So this gives you a little bit more flexibility by being elastic about who they're assigned to within the system. So the process for this is multifold. You first create your system layer, your Windows 10, your operating systems, and you can do them for different options. You would create a platform layer and define how the system is going to be defined out. You would then create your operating system layers, or your app layers on the system for your various applications. Once the various applications have been created, you create a template. So you come in and you define a template, and you make it publishable within the environment. So you define your system for the system. So in this case, we're dealing with the XenDesktop, MCS, Microsoft Office, and Windows 10. I've created a template. This template can now be used to deploy out to the MCS or PVS on the environment. Now, one of the nice things about PVS, if you decide you want to go down that route and you want to deploy this out via provisioning services, is that once it's integrated and you create your image, the system will automatically create your VHDX file. So it will automatically create the file image that can be used to deploy out the operating system. So it kind of takes a whole step away from us, which makes it a little bit more relevant for deployment in the system. Some other new features that we're looking at, and this is dealing with the newer versions of Director. When you're looking at Director on the system, let me get to my Director here. When you're looking at your Director component, most of this is pretty much the same. So if you're looking at Citrix Director, we still have the same components that we've seen being developed over time from its very first iteration back with XenDesktop 5.6. This one, though, has more options. We have more options in the way of alerts, so we can create specific alert policies in the system for what's going on in the environment, so you don't need to be sitting in front of the Director to see something going on. You can create an alert policy for what you're looking for, and we can create an email server configuration, so the system will then let us know, hey, your servers are going down. So we have some additional alert options. We've got some additional filters that we can come in and we can create our own filters. We've got some new trends on the system. So they've added in some options on the trends page for your display. So they've changed it a little bit. We're looking at failures, and then we have both all of the desktop, the server, etc. Log on performance, load evaluator index. We look at our capacity management on the system, so what apps are available, machine usage, resource utilization. So how are your desktops and servers currently being used on the system? So rather than having to go into PowerShell or Studio, you can look at it right here and see exactly how many machines are being used. Application failures. Do you have any custom reports that you want to create? So we can create some custom reports. And we've got the ability to integrate with, let's see if I can get this guy back in. All right, let me log back in here. And log back on. We have the ability now to integrate with both NetScaler Insight Center as well as the NetScaler Management Analytics Server, or MAS. So when you're looking at the system, we can bring in the MAS option here and look at what's going on through the gateway. So when you're looking at a user coming in externally from the gateway, we can look at the users and the applications that have been currently been involved or traversing the gateway into our system. So we can look at what's been going on in the ICA round trip time, the WAN latency, DC latency, bandwidth for the desktops, what applications are currently being used through the gateway, what users are currently logged in through our gateway, and we can look at the bandwidth and some other options on the system. So we can integrate this into the into Director. So this is a new feature with the newer versions on the system, and this is replacing NetScaler Insight, which replaced EdgeSight on the system. The other thing that's new that you may consider working within your environment is going to be the ability now to integrate your systems into cloud-based. So, and we have a couple of options on this. So when you're looking at your deployments, we have a couple of ways of deploying the system. For many years, when you were dealing with MetaFrame and Presentation Server, your servers were all physical boxes that were built in the side of the on-premise. Then slowly, Citrix with XenApp 6 and 6.5 started transitioning from physical boxes to virtualized boxes, gave you a little bit more control on your system. Then the new thing came out, and this is where we look at the cloud integration options. So we can take most of our infrastructure, remove a lot of the cost of maintaining a data center, and improving security by putting some critical components inside of the Citrix cloud. This gives us some redundancy, gives us the ability to increase our capacity or decrease it as necessary. And it just gives you a whole new level of flexibility that you don't have when you're dealing with physical boxes or on-premise virtual boxes. So this gives us the ability to either keep everything on-premise where your delivery controllers, your databases, your license servers, everything is on premise, which some companies still prefer, or going to Citrix hosted, in which many of your Citrix components are going to be hosted within the Citrix cloud. Your delivery controllers, your storefront server, your license server, your SQL Server database on the system. And this gives you the ability to allow Citrix to maintain the updating of those. So your delivery controllers can be updated for you automatically or on a set schedule. It really depends on what you want on your system. So you have some options. We've got some other options as well. We can do third-party hosted, so you can host your entire deployment in AWS or Microsoft Azure on the system. Really depends on what your company decides that they want to do within the system. So, and if you're just looking at a control panel, you're going to see a Citrix Cloud panel like this. And when you get into the system here, you'll see your tools and your XenDesktop services. And managing this is exactly the same way we do it now. We have Citrix Studio. A few things are gone, but you still have Citrix Studio to create your delivery groups, your catalogs, your policies, etc. And everything is is still the same within the environment here. And then we talked about the storefront options and the improved director options on the system. So that's a quick overview of the XenApp XenDesktop 7.15 and sundry options here. So at this point, we have the Q&A. So Rich, I'm going to hand it over to you. And if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. I got a few minutes. I think Rich is still there. Give him just a second. I think we're having technical difficulties. Rich, are you there? Yeah, let me check something here real quick. Make sure I don't have a... Hang on a second. I'm trying to find Rich here. Let's see if he's, let me send a quick message. There he is.
David, I'm here. Sorry, I was on mute forever. Okay, we do have a few questions. You ready to run through these?
Sure.
All right. Okay, first question, is there a way to include the controllers into the reboot schedule also using the tags?
No. The tags are for your are for the VDA enabled systems. So no, that would be a no on that one.
Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure what this was referencing when it was submitted. The question just says, does that show up with Unified Gateway? And it was around 20 minutes ago, so I'm not sure what the reference is there.
Are we talking about? Yeah, unless that could be multiple things. If they're talking about the director components, yeah, that's what when they're coming through the Unified Gateway or the NetScaler Gateway.
Oh, you know what? She followed up, David. It's with password and security question challenge.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Let's see. There's a question about the slide deck. We'll send out the recording, which includes the slide deck. Okay, here's another question. Does AppLayering work with screen capturing and monitoring software, as well as standard screen capture?
You'll have to check. You check with your Citrix representative. It will work with Citrix, excuse me, with Citrix Director, because the app layering is behind the scenes. It's creating the actual images that are used for MCS on the system. So we still have the VDA. We're still coming in using the remote assistance. So that functionality has not changed. As far as third-party tools, you would need to check with the product documentation to see if it's supported.
Okay, great. Is there a way to have Studio remember column customizations in 7.15?
It should automatically. When you set up your columns, it should remain from boot up to boot up. I'll have to double check that. If I've never seen it go away, mine stay.
Okay.
So,
can app layering be applied to physical Windows servers?
no.
Okay.
Well, let me Rich, let me readdress.
Right.
If you're using MCS, no. If you're using PVS and you're using provisioning services to stream out to a physical box, yes, but not to create the actual server that I know of. You might be able to tweak it, but I've not seen that implementation in the system. You probably could, but
okay. Okay. Last question I see here is Elastic app layering replacing app streaming with app v streamed apps?
No, and I didn't go into that in great depth. The app layering, the Elastic layering is taking care of, and we have what's called a user layer, are replacing the personal B disk and the app disk functionality. If you're still going to be using the streaming, that's still a viable option. So I've not heard anything about app v being replaced by anything else.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, David, that's all the questions that were submitted. If anyone else has any follow-up questions, those can be emailed. You can email those to me, rich@layer8training.com or info@layer8training.com, or just reply to the webinar email that the webinar invitation email that you received, and we'll make sure we get back to you as soon as possible to answer those questions. I want to thank David once again for presenting the content to us and the webinar. We certainly appreciate everyone that took time out of their busy days to attend. If you're interested in any upcoming courses, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to provide you with that information. So with that, we are going to end the webinar. Stay tuned for an email with a link to the recording that you can forward on to your coworkers or review it again for yourself. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.